You think starvation is the worst thing that can happen to someone? You are wrong. The worst is when people born with silver spoons use your desperate instinct for survival as their entertainment, totally unaware they just awakened a monster from the bottom of society. Listen closely. The story I am about to tell is no pathetic Cinderella dream waiting for a prince. It is a flawless death sentence for those who believe they are the law. Hello, wonderful listeners of Maya Revenge Stories. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us with zero budget to operate. If you find today's story captivating, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can pay our hardworking team to cover their living expenses and continue creating these stories for you. You can support us by scanning the QR code on the screen or by clicking the donation link in the description or comments. My name is Juliet Williamson. I am 19 years old, and I am always starving. I do not mean the mild, passing hunger that these rich kids at Viridian Heights complain about when they miss their morning latte or when their private chef is running late. I mean the kind of gnawing, hollow ache that keeps you awake at night, the kind that makes your hands shake during exams and your vision blur in the middle of a lecture. I am a sophomore at this prestigious private academy, walking halls paved with imported marble, surrounded by teenagers wearing watches that cost more than my entire life is worth. To be fair, my life lost all its financial worth exactly 2 years ago. A horrific car crash took both of my parents and left me with nothing but a mountain of crushing medical debt. The hospital bills piled up into the hundreds of thousands of dollars, a financial noose tightening around my neck before I even had the chance to graduate high school. To keep breathing, and to keep the collectors from tearing apart the tiny studio apartment I rent. I work the graveyard shift at Aegis Horizon Crest. It is a highly sanitized, fictitious-sounding name for a very real, very ruthless debt collection data firm. I spend my nights hunched over glowing monitors until 4 in the morning, tracking down the digital assets of ruined families just like mine. It drains my soul and exhausts my physical body. Despite the endless hours of labor, my paycheck barely covers the brutal interest on my debt. It certainly does not leave me with enough money to buy a decent, warm lunch. Then there is my deskmate, Hayes Sterling. Hayes is the sole heir to a multi-billion-dollar tech conglomerate. He possesses the kind of effortless, golden boy perfection that makes people sick with envy. He does not even have to try to command the room. Every single morning, his mahogany desk is transformed into an altar of sugary devotion. Desperate girls from every social clique leave expensive, artisanal pastries on his desk, hoping to win a passing glance from him. Croissants from high-end bakeries, gold leaf chocolates, and delicate fruit tarts just sit there, abandoned like garbage. Hayes barely looks at them, often sweeping them into the trash with utter indifference. For weeks, I sat next to that mountain of wasted, exquisite food, my stomach twisting in absolute agony. The smell of rich butter and spun sugar was a physical torture. One day, the hunger clawed so deeply at my insides that reason completely snapped. When the classroom was empty and quiet, I slipped a discarded almond croissant into my battered backpack. It was the most incredible thing I had eaten in months. It was also the worst mistake of my life. I did not know I had stepped directly into the crosshairs of the Viridian Vault. It is an exclusive, toxic, anonymous gossip application run entirely by the student body. The app is a digital weapon, and suddenly, I was the primary target. Every time I thought I was safe, every time the blinding hunger forced me to sneak another abandoned pastry from Hayes's desk, my cheap, cracked phone would vibrate. Cruel, venomous notifications lit up my screen, sent by cowards hiding behind encrypted usernames. Look at the poor thief eating Hayes's trash. Nothing but a pathetic sewer rat scavenging for crumbs. I swallowed the stolen food along with my pride, ignoring the vicious whispers in the hallways and the mocking stares. I thought the digital humiliation was the absolute worst they could do. I was profoundly naive. The cruelty reached its absolute peak thanks to Sloane. She is the undisputed queen bee of Viridian Heights and, more importantly, Hayes's arranged fiancé. Sloane is a girl composed entirely of designer clothes, generational wealth, and pure concentrated malice. She saw my desperation not as a human tragedy, but as an opportunity for high society entertainment. I arrived at class one morning to find a single, flawless blueberry macaron resting on the very edge of Hayes's desk. It looked completely untouched and devastatingly tempting. My hands trembled as I reached for it, completely unaware that Sloane had meticulously injected the sweet cream filling with a permanent blue dental dye. It was a heavy-duty chemical used in medical procedures, designed to stain the teeth and mouth an aggressive, unnatural blue that would not wash off for several weeks. She had orchestrated the entire scene. She wanted to catch the starving sewer rat red-handed. She wanted me to bite into that poison, painting my mouth a hideous blue so she could parade my humiliation in front of the entire school, cementing her absolute power over anyone who dared to exist in her perfect world. My fingers brushed the smooth shell of the macaron. It was cold, as if it had been waiting in a refrigerator just for this precise moment. I lifted it halfway to my mouth, my stomach clenching in painful anticipation, but then, the tiny hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The classroom, normally a chaotic symphony of wealthy teenagers bragging about their lavish weekends, was entirely too quiet. I glanced out of the corner of my eye, 3 rows back. Sloane and her sycophantic inner circle were leaning forward, their eyes glued to me with a predatory intensity. Their manicured hands clutched their high-end smartphones, the camera lenses angled directly at my face. A primal survival instinct, heavily honed by long, dark nights dealing with ruthless debt collectors, screamed at me to stop. The air in the room felt incredibly thick, almost suffocating. I lowered my trembling hand, slipping the pastry beneath the heavy wooden lid of the desk. I pushed it deep into the shadows of the storage compartment out of sight. The sudden, collective sigh of bitter disappointment from the back of the room confirmed my absolute worst fears. It was a meticulously planned trap. Barely 2 seconds later, the heavy oak door swung open, and Hayes Sterling strolled into the room. He dropped his custom leather bag onto his chair and slumped into the seat right next to me. He did not say a single word. He never did. He just opened the desk compartment to grab his expensive notebook. His hand suddenly paused. He pulled out the bright blue macaron I had just hidden. "No!" Sloane gasped loudly from the back row. Her voice cracked sharply, shattering the tense silence of the classroom. "Hayes, wait. Do not eat that." It was far too late. With maddening, deliberate casualness, Hayes took a massive bite out of the pastry. The reaction was horrifyingly instantaneous. A vivid neon shade of medical-grade cobalt blue exploded across his lips, coating his teeth and tongue. It looked like he had swallowed a vial of highly toxic ink. The classroom immediately erupted into absolute pandemonium. Girls shrieked in terror. Heavy chairs scraped violently against the polished marble floor. Sloane sprinted wildly down the aisle, her face pale with genuine panic, swatting the remaining half of the ruined pastry out of his hand so hard it hit the chalkboard. But Hayes did not flinch. He did not look at the frantic girl desperately grabbing his arm. He did not spit out the bitter chemical dye. Slowly, with chilling precision, he turned his head and locked his dark eyes with mine. His gaze was freezing cold. There was no confusion, no sudden anger at a stupid high school prank. It was a calculated, razor-sharp stare that cut straight through my ribs and into my soul. In that singular, suspended moment, peering through the chaotic noise and screaming of the classroom, I saw a silent promise of absolute destruction. He knew exactly what had just happened. The war had silently been declared, and I was inexplicably the chosen enemy. "You vicious psycho!" Sloane's piercing shriek snapped my attention violently away from Hayes. She was pointing a trembling, perfectly manicured finger right at my face. Her earlier panic had seamlessly morphed into a furious, defensive rage. "You poisoned him, you disgusting, jealous freak. You put dangerous chemicals in his food because you cannot stand the fact that he completely ignores you." "I did not do anything," I said. my voice barely a whisper against the rapidly rising tide of vicious accusations. It was already on the desk when I got here. Liar, Sloane yelled, turning around to face the angry crowd gathering tightly around us. We all saw her hovering over his desk like a rat before he walked in. She was trying to poison him. Within 15 short minutes, I was escorted by 2 burly security guards down the long, silent corridor leading to the disciplinary wing. The air in the headmaster's massive office was aggressively sterile, smelling heavily of lemon polish and impending doom. Headmaster Vance sat rigidly behind a massive mahogany desk, his hands steepled, viewing me not as a 19-year-old student, but as an intolerable liability. Sloane sat on a plush leather sofa nearby, weeping perfect, victimized tears while texting furiously on her phone. Miss Williamson, Headmaster Vance began, his deep tone dripping with undisguised condescension. This prestigious institution maintains a strict zero-tolerance policy for physical violence or malicious tampering. You are facing the immediate revocation of your full academic scholarship. Furthermore, the Sterling family has every legal right to involve the local authorities for intentional physical assault. You could be facing very serious criminal charges. The opulent room started to spin violently around me. Without that scholarship, I was out on the unforgiving street by tomorrow morning, with a criminal record attached to my name. My night job at the secure data firm would vanish instantly. I would be utterly and permanently destroyed. I am completely innocent, I stated, forcing my shaky voice to stay steady, refusing to let these people see me break. I did not put that macaron on his desk, and I certainly did not poison it. There is a high-definition security camera pointing directly at our specific row in that classroom. Check the video footage. Look at the recording from 7 o'clock this morning until the exact moment Hayes walked in. It will definitively prove I am telling the truth. It will show exactly who planted that trap. Sloane instantly stopped crying. A tiny, highly triumphant smirk flickered across her glossy lips for a fraction of a second before she skillfully hid it behind her hand. Headmaster Vance sighed heavily, opening his sleek silver laptop. He clicked the wireless mouse a few times, his wrinkled face remaining entirely impassive. I have already reviewed the digital security logs for that academic sector. Miss Williamson, unfortunately, the main server system underwent a scheduled maintenance wipe at exactly 6:30 this morning. There is absolutely no video footage of your classroom prior to 8:15. My heart slammed painfully against my ribs. A scheduled maintenance wipe. It was a blatant, bold-faced lie. A state-of-the-art security system at a billionaire preparatory academy does not simply erase itself during peak morning arrival hours. Sloane's powerful family had made a quick phone call. Vast sums of money had quietly changed hands, and the digital truth had been wiped completely clean from the school servers. I sat there in the stifling, oppressive silence, looking at the smug, untouchable girl on the sofa and the deeply corrupt administrator hiding cowardly behind his expensive screen. The horrific realization crashed over me like a freezing tidal wave. My innocence meant absolutely nothing in this room. The truth was an expensive commodity I could never afford, and they had just effortlessly purchased my execution. I walked out of the administration wing with my head held high and my heart entirely frozen. Tears are a pathetic luxury reserved for those who have a safe place to fall, and crying has never paid a single medical bill in the brutal, glittering ecosystem of this prestigious academy. Morality was nothing but a hilarious joke told by the weak and believed by the naive. The only real laws governing these polished marble halls were absolute financial power and weaponized information. Since I possessed absolutely zero power, I had to acquire the information. The wealthy hunters thought they had successfully trapped a harmless, starving animal. They were about to discover they had cornered a ruthless predator. That night, the fluorescent lights of my workplace hummed their usual, deeply sterile tune. The massive data floor was almost entirely deserted at 2 o'clock in the morning. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard, but I was no longer processing standard, low-level medical collections. My floor supervisor was fast asleep 3 cubicles down, blissfully unaware that I was systematically dismantling the corporate firewall. Working at a ruthless debt retrieval agency granted me shadow access to the most secure financial databases in the entire country. It took me exactly 45 minutes to bypass the secondary security protocols, masking my digital footprint before plunging directly into the heavily guarded portfolios of the local elite families. "Let us see what you are hiding," I whispered to the glowing monitor, typing in the surname of my primary target. The screen instantly flooded with highly classified documents, offshore account balances, and aggressive loan restructuring agreements. I leaned closer to the monitor, my breath hitching sharply in my throat as my eyes scanned the harsh data. The pristine, untouchable facade of Sloane's incredibly wealthy family was an absolute, colossal lie. According to the deeply buried bank ledgers, her family empire was bleeding out at a catastrophic rate. They were severely overleveraged, drowning in over $200 million of highly toxic debt. Their entire extravagant lifestyle, the custom designer wardrobes, the imported luxury cars, the lavish European vacations, was nothing but a fragile house of cards propped up by desperate, high-interest loans. But the true bombshell, the fatal strike that would guarantee their total ruin, was hidden in a secondary, encrypted folder. The family was secretly siphoning massive amounts of capital directly from the Academy's annual charity foundation just to cover the crippling monthly interest on their personal debts. They were actively stealing from the very philanthropic fund they publicly championed at every social gala. My thumb hovered dangerously over the print command. I could send this explosive financial file to every major news outlet in the state right at this very second, but destroying Sloane with one swift, clean blow felt entirely too merciful. A sudden public execution lacks the exquisite agony of a slow, creeping paranoia. I wanted to watch her perfect kingdom burn to ashes from the inside out. I decided to start with her loyal subjects, using a heavily encrypted proxy server routed through a dozen different foreign countries. I created an untraceable, anonymous messaging account. I spent the next 3 hours sifting through the digital trash of her tight inner circle, finding their most humiliating, deeply buried secrets buried in the hidden corners of the data servers. At exactly 8 o'clock the next morning, the digital slaughter officially commenced. I sat quietly at my desk in homeroom as expensive smartphones began to buzz simultaneously across the room. I watched Chloe, Sloane's vicious right-hand girl, turn the color of wet ash. She had just received a high-resolution screenshot proving her prized, limited edition handbag was a cheap counterfeit purchased from a shady overseas distributor 2 desks away. Madison choked violently on her designer water when a masked message arrived, containing undeniable photographic evidence of her bribing the junior lacrosse coach to secure the answers for her final calculus exam. I did not stop at private, personal messages. I unleashed the venom directly onto their own chosen battlefield. I easily bypassed the incredibly weak security of their precious gossip application and uploaded the damning evidence for the entire student body to witness in real time. The fallout was perfectly chaotic. Within 48 hours, the tightly knit group of elite girls completely self-destructed. The grand cafeteria, once their undisputed royal court, turned into a vicious war zone of screaming matches and shattered glass. They wildly accused each other of being the anonymous hacker, entirely incapable of imagining that the quiet, impoverished girl in the corner could orchestrate their spectacular downfall. Sloane looked increasingly frantic, desperately trying to maintain control over a social hierarchy that was rapidly fracturing into terrified, paranoid pieces. Through all this beautiful, violent destruction, Hayes sat beside me, as silent and unreadable as ever. However, the dynamic between us had fundamentally shifted. He no longer arrived with his usual mountain of decadent, sugary offerings. The sickening smell of expensive pastries vanished completely from our shared desk. Instead, he simply watched me. His dark, calculating eyes tracked my subtle movements, deeply analyzing the cold absence of fear in my posture. On Friday morning, I arrived to find the mahogany desk perfectly bare, except for a single, small, yellow sticky note pressed firmly onto my side of the wood. There was no sweet treat, no mocking trap waiting to spring, just a string of 14 handwritten numbers. I recognized the precise formatting immediately. It was a secure offshore banking routing number. I slid the small piece of paper into my pocket, keeping my facial expression entirely blank. I did not look at him, but I could feel the heavy, intense weight of his gaze burning into the side of my face. The golden boy was no longer pretending I was invisible. He was intentionally throwing down a breadcrumb, testing my intelligence, silently daring me to follow his hidden trail into the dark. The rules of engagement had irrevocably changed, and the real psychological game had just begun. The shadows became my absolute domain. The initial shock of the leaked secrets was merely the opening move on a very dark chessboard. I did not want to simply expose Sloane. I wanted to systematically dismantle her sanity, piece by fragile piece, until she begged for a mercy I had no intention of giving. The first message I sent her from my encrypted, untraceable number was terrifyingly simple. It contained a single, highly classified PDF attachment showing the impending foreclosure warning on her mother's pristine summer estate, accompanied by a polite, venomous demand. Walk into the athletic director's office and permanently resign as the captain of the varsity squad. You have until 3 o'clock this afternoon. If you fail, this financial document goes out to the entire alumni mailing list. I sat 3 desks away and watched her read it in the middle of our advanced history lecture. All the blood instantly drained from her perfectly contoured face. Her manicured fingernails dug so deeply into her wooden desk I genuinely thought the acrylic would snap in half. At exactly 2:45, I watched her walk mechanically down the hall, tears streaming down her face, and hand over her prestigious uniform. But stripping away a high school title was merely a superficial scratch. I needed to break her spirit on a molecular level. 2 days later, during the chaotic, crowded lunch rush, my burner phone sent the next command. Stand up, walk to the nearest garbage receptacle, take the discarded, rotting cafeteria food and empty it entirely over your own head. You have exactly 60 seconds to comply, or the absolute truth about your father's defaulted loans becomes tomorrow's front-page headline. The grand cafeteria went dead silent when Sloane slowly stood up from her velvet-lined VIP table. Her movements were incredibly stiff, resembling a poorly constructed puppet controlled by cruel, invisible strings. She walked to the heavy plastic bin, reached her trembling hands inside, and pulled out a foam tray covered in half-eaten, coagulated pasta and brown sludge. With a stifled, agonizing sob that echoed across the quiet room, she raised the filthy tray above her blonde hair and turned it upside down. The disgusting mess slid down her expensive silk blouse, staining her skin and her pride. People gasped out loud. Nobody dared to laugh. The sheer, inexplicable horror of seeing the untouchable, vicious queen humiliate herself so violently paralyzed the entire student body. Her mind simply could not comprehend a threat coming from the invisible bottom of the social food chain. In her warped, elitist reality, only a predator of equal or greater wealth could possibly possess the resources to bypass her family's extensive banking firewalls. Her terrified, bloodshot eyes naturally landed on the only person who fit that exact description, her golden boy fiancé, Hayes Sterling. "Why are you doing this to me?" she screamed hysterically at him in the middle of the main academic courtyard the following morning. Her voice was jagged, entirely stripped of its usual refined elegance. "What kind of sick, twisted psychological game are you playing? You want to break off the arranged engagement? Fine, but stop destroying my family." Hayes stood perfectly still, his posture relaxed, his hands tucked casually into his tailored trousers. He did not defend himself against the wild accusations. He offered no comforting words to the sobbing girl. He merely watched her have a very public mental breakdown with an expression of profound, chilling boredom. That cold, unyielding silence only fueled her absolute paranoia. By the end of the week, the massive corporate merger between the Sterling and Kensington empires was indefinitely suspended. Their powerful fathers were aggressively threatening each other with vicious lawsuits. The unbreakable high society alliance was in absolute ruins, rotting quickly from a toxic seed of doubt I had carefully planted. To ensure the pressure remained agonizingly high, I decided to drag the school administration directly into the crossfire. I slipped into the underground utility corridors of the academy during a quiet prep period, bypassing the ancient mechanical locks to access the main server hub. I wrote a targeted, delayed script aimed directly at the media room network. At precisely 4 o'clock, while the ambitious editor of the school newspaper was quietly finalizing the monthly issue, the heavy-duty laser printer on his desk suddenly roared to life. It did not stop printing until 50 pages were stacked high in the output tray. It was a comprehensive, highly detailed ledger of the Kensington family's forged loan collateral and illegal charity deductions. The young editor did not delete the files. He immediately started making discreet phone calls. The invisible noose was pulling incredibly tight. Then, the dangerous thrill of the game nearly ended my life. It happened on a Tuesday night at the Aegis Horizon Crest Data Center. I was halfway through my grueling graveyard shift, sipping bitter, cold coffee, when the overhead fluorescent light suddenly flashed a violent, blinding red. The massive steel doors at the end of the data floor locked shut with a heavy, magnetic thud. Nobody touched their keyboards. A booming voice echoed through the overhead intercom. It was the director of cybersecurity. "We have detected a massive, unauthorized data extraction in the elite portfolio sector. We are initiating a hard network trace. Nobody leaves this room." Panic seized my chest like a freezing iron vice. My lungs completely forgot how to process oxygen. The penalty for corporate espionage and financial data theft at this level was not a simple slap on the wrist. It was 20 years in a federal penitentiary. I would not just lose my meager paycheck. My entire existence would be erased behind thick concrete walls. The trace program was a brutal, unstoppable algorithm sweeping through the internal network, hunting down the exact terminal that had downloaded the Kensington files. It was moving incredibly fast. I had less than 90 seconds before it hit my specific workstation. My fingers hit the keyboard with a frantic, desperate speed. I did not try to fight the tracing algorithm. I simply built a digital mirror to reflect it, relying on every ounce of coding knowledge I possessed. I ripped open the back end of my proxy server. I grabbed the digital breadcrumbs leading directly to my chair and violently twisted their trajectory. I needed a scapegoat, and I needed one that the federal authorities would immediately believe. I hard-coded a fake digital footprint, mapping the illegal data extraction away from the Aegis building and routing it directly through the public internet provider of the wealthy suburban district. I typed in the exact, static IP address of the Kensington estate. I specifically targeted the unique router identification number connected to the custom desktop computer sitting inside Sloane's massive, luxurious bedroom. I hit the execute key just 3 seconds before the Aegis security sweep slammed violently into my terminal. I held my breath, staring blankly at my frozen monitor as the heavy boots of the armed security team marched down the center aisle. The director stared at his glowing tablet, his face twisting into a scowl of deep confusion. "Cancel the floor lockdown," he barked loudly, sounding incredibly irritated. The breach did not originate from an internal employee. The trace confirms the secure firewall was penetrated externally by the subject themselves. It came directly from the residential network of the Kensington family. I let out a slow, silent exhale, feeling my heart pound fiercely against my ribs. I had not just miraculously escaped a lengthy prison sentence, I had successfully handed the federal authorities the exact weapon they needed to raid Sloane's house. The Viridian Heights Autumn Fundraising Gala was a breathtaking display of unimaginable wealth masking a rotting, desperate core. The grand ballroom of the academy had been transformed into a glittering palace, draped in heavy silk and illuminated by massive crystal chandeliers. Waiters in pristine white tuxedos drifted through the crowd, carrying silver trays loaded with champagne that cost more per bottle than my monthly rent. At the absolute center of this opulent circus stood the Kensington family, Sloane wore a custom silk gown that swept the marble floor, flashing her perfectly bleached smile for the flashing cameras of the local society press. Her parents stood beside her, playing the roles of the generous, philanthropic billionaires to absolute perfection. They were hosting this entire charity event. To the hundreds of VIP guests, politicians, and wealthy alumni in attendance, the Kensingtons were the pinnacle of high society. To me, they were drowning rats putting on a dazzling show to distract the world while they secretly prepared to siphon millions of dollars from the charity donation fund just to survive another month. I stood near the edge of the ballroom, wearing a deeply discounted plain black dress I had bought from a thrift store. Clutched in my hands was a simple, black velvet evening bag. I had specifically chosen it because it was a nearly perfect, cheap visual replica of the designer clutch Mrs. Kensington carried to every public event. I knew exactly what was coming tonight. The 14 digits Hayes had left on my desk were not just an offshore banking routing number. When I ran that specific sequence through the Aegis database, it linked directly to a high-risk insurance underwriter who had just authorized a massive policy on the gala's centerpiece item, a magnificent diamond necklace donated by a prestigious jeweler. The policy listed Sloane as the primary custodian for the evening. Hayes had handed me the exact blueprint of their desperate final move. Sloane, pushed to the absolute edge of her sanity by my anonymous threats, had figured out that the person tormenting her had to be someone close enough to see her reactions. She was going to steal the diamonds, claim the massive insurance payout to temporarily save her family, and plant the stolen jewelry on the easiest, most disposable target in the room, me. The music swelled, a live orchestra playing a sweeping classical piece that echoed off the high ceilings. I watched Sloane break away from her parents and glide purposefully toward the dimly lit alcove where I was standing. Her eyes were completely cold, stripped of any fake warmth. She bumped her shoulder violently against mine as she passed by. "Watch your step, trash," she hissed under her breath. I felt a sudden, distinct heaviness drop into my open velvet bag. She had just planted the stolen diamond necklace. She walked away quickly, immediately raising her phone to her ear to make the call she had planned all along. She was calling the police to report a grand theft. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs, but my mind was entirely clear. I had exactly 2 minutes before the authorities locked down the building. I walked calmly and deliberately straight toward the central VIP table where the Kensington family was seated. Mrs. Kensington had left her expensive black velvet clutch resting carelessly on the edge of the table while she greeted a city senator. I seamlessly slipped a tiny, encrypted USB drive into my own bag, nesting it right next to the stolen diamonds. That drive contained every single piece of downloaded evidence proving their massive loan fraud and charity embezzlement. As I passed the table, I intentionally stumbled, knocking over a tall crystal water glass. The glass shattered loudly on the polished floor. Several guests gasped and stepped back. In that single second of chaotic distraction, I dropped my cheap velvet bag onto the chair and smoothly scooped up Mrs. Kensington's identical designer clutch. I continued walking toward the exit, blending perfectly back into the shadows of the crowd. Suddenly, the heavy mahogany doors of the grand ballroom slammed shut. The classical music ground to a jarring, discordant halt. 5 uniformed police officers and 2 detectives in sharp suits marched into the center of the room. The lead detective held up his badge, his voice booming over the confused murmurs of the wealthy guests. "Nobody leaves this room. The centerpiece diamond necklace has been reported stolen from the secure display case." The crowd erupted into shocked whispers. Sloane stepped forward, pointing a trembling, perfectly manicured finger directly across the room at me. Her voice was obnoxiously loud, designed to capture the attention of every single camera and guest in the room. "It is her, Juliet Williamson. I saw her hovering suspiciously near the display case earlier. She is a charity case student. She is completely desperate for money. Check her bag." The lead detective marched over to me, his expression stern and unforgiving. "Miss, I need you to hand over your bag immediately." I did not argue. I did not cry. I looked straight into Sloane's triumphant, malicious eyes and calmly handed the black velvet clutch to the officer. He unzipped it. He reached his hand inside. He pulled out a compact mirror, a tube of cheap lip balm, and a pack of chewing gum. That was all. Sloane's triumphant smile instantly vanished. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. "No, that is completely impossible. You are not looking hard enough. I know she took it. I saw her." "The bag is empty, miss," the detective said coldly, turning his attention back to the crowd. "We will need to search the immediate vicinity and the host's belongings. Standard procedure." He walked directly to the central VIP table. Mrs. Kensington looked highly offended as the detective picked up the black velvet bag resting on her chair. He opened the gold clasp. The entire ballroom held its collective breath. The detective slowly pulled out a blindingly brilliant string of enormous, glittering diamonds. A collective gasp of absolute horror ripped through the massive room. The society photographers instantly raised their cameras, the blinding flashes illuminating the sheer terror on Mrs. Kensington's pale face. But the detective was not finished. He reached his thick fingers back into the bag and pulled out the small, black USB drive. "What is this?" the detective demanded, looking directly at Sloane's father. "I have absolutely no idea," Mr. Kensington stammered, sweating profusely, the illusion of his absolute power evaporating into thin air. "That is not ours. Someone planted that. We will secure this device and have our cyber division analyze its contents immediately," the detective announced loudly. I knew exactly what the cyber division would find in less than 1 hour. The Kensingtons were officially finished. Their wealth, their reputation, their entire fake empire had just imploded in the most humiliating, public way imaginable. The flashing cameras captured every single agonizing second of their spectacular downfall. Sloane finally snapped. Her fragile sanity, stretched to the absolute limit over the past week, shattered entirely. She let out a horrific, guttural scream that sounded more animal than human. She tore off her high heels and lunged directly at me. Her hands curled into vicious claws, aiming straight for my face. "You did this. You ruined everything. You filthy, disgusting rat. I will kill you." She never even made it within 3 feet of me. 2 large police officers tackled her violently to the floor. Her expensive silk gown ripped loudly as they pinned her against the hard marble, wrenching her arms behind her back. The sharp, metallic click of heavy handcuffs snapping around her wrists echoed loudly above the chaotic shouting of the crowd. I stood perfectly still, watching the undisputed Queen Bee of Viridian Heights writhe and scream on the red carpet, her face smeared with tears and makeup, completely stripped of her crown. The brutal reign of Sloane Kensington was over. 72 hours after the autumn gala, heavily armed agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation raided the Kensington estate. The news networks broadcasted the entire spectacle live, showing federal authorities carrying out dozens of sealed cardboard boxes filled with forged financial documents. Sloane was formally expelled from Viridian Heights by the end of the week. Her wealthy family was completely liquidated, and she vanished from the elite high society circles without a single trace, entirely erased from the world she once ruled. The school felt incredibly quiet on Monday morning. I was walking down the deserted East Corridor, heading toward my first period class, when a tall figure stepped out of the shadows of the library entrance. It was Hayes Sterling. His designer uniform was perfectly pressed, his posture relaxed, exuding the calm confidence of a grandmaster who had just won a grueling tournament. "It was a brilliant performance, Juliet," Hayes said, his voice smooth and entirely devoid of emotion. "The swapped bags, the hidden drive, I honestly did not think you had the nerve to execute it so flawlessly." I stopped walking, looking at him with absolute indifference. "You knew she was going to frame me." "I knew everything from the very beginning," he admitted, taking a slow step closer. "The Kensington family was quietly blackmailing my father, threatening to block our upcoming corporate merger unless I married Sloane. I needed a legitimate, heavily public reason to sever the engagement without damaging my family's reputation. I saw how desperate you were, I saw the raw hunger in your eyes. So, I deliberately left those expensive pastries on our desk. I used you as the perfect, starving bait to force Sloane to reveal her deeply vicious nature. You were a highly effective pawn. Juliet, you did exactly what I calculated you would do, and you freed me. He smiled, a chilling, arrogant smirk that expected absolute submission. He genuinely believed he was the untouchable mastermind who had brilliantly orchestrated the entire war from his mahogany desk. I did not yell. I did not slap him. Instead, I let out a slow, freezing laugh that completely erased the smug smile from his perfect face. I reached into my battered backpack and pulled out a thick, sealed manila envelope, pressing it firmly against his chest. You really thought you were the only one playing chess, I whispered coldly. Open it. Hayes frowned, ripping open the paper flap. He pulled out a thick stack of heavily encrypted financial manifests. As his dark eyes scanned the top page, the remaining color drained entirely from his face. While you were busy feeling superior, watching me fight for my life, I was digging through the deepest servers at Aegis Horizon Crest, I explained, keeping my voice dangerously quiet. I did not just find the Kensington debt files. I found the master ledgers proving that your father's massive tech conglomerate secretly owns and funds the exact medical debt collection ring that destroyed my family. Your entire empire is built on the illegal exploitation of grieving, bankrupt citizens. Hayes physically stumbled backward, the papers trembling violently in his hands. You did not— I already did, I stated clearly. I handed the unredacted digital copies directly to the lead federal investigator 3 hours ago. I knew you were using me. Hayes, I just needed you distracted long enough to gather the ultimate proof. Right at that exact moment, the morning bell rang loudly. At the exact same second, the opening bell of the National Stock Exchange echoed across the country. Within the first 15 minutes of trading, the Sterling Corporation stock evaporated by $3 billion. The Golden Boy stared at me in pure, unadulterated horror, finally realizing that the disposable pawn had just trapped the king in an inescapable checkmate. Over the next 2 months, the corrupted administration of Viridian Heights was ruthlessly purged by an aggressive media frenzy. The school was forced to completely restructure, recognizing my pristine academic record and the extreme injustice I had suffered. The state board awarded me a full, unconditional government scholarship. The federal shutdown of Aegis Horizon Crest officially nullified all predatory medical collections, completely wiping out my family's massive debt. On a bright, crisp Tuesday morning, I sat at my new desk near the large window, bathing in the warm, golden sunlight. A nervous freshman boy walked by, pausing awkwardly next to my chair. He hesitantly tried to place a small carton of milk and a wrapped sandwich on my desk, clearly having heard the old, pathetic rumors about the starving girl. I looked at him, smiling with genuine, polite warmth. I gently slid the food back toward his hands. Reaching into my own bag, I pulled out a hot, beautifully prepared lunch that I had purchased myself, using the honest wages from my new, legitimate tutoring job. Thank you, but I have my own, I said softly. I will never have to eat anyone's discarded leftovers ever again, and no one, no matter how much money or power they possess, will ever dare to use me as their entertainment in this lifetime. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for listening to today's story. Please let me know in the comments where you are listening from. I always love reading them. If you found today's revenge story satisfying and entertaining, please consider helping us out. As I mentioned earlier, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel. If you can, please support us with just $1 so we can pay our incredibly hardworking team. This helps them feed their families and allows us to continue creating and bringing you even better stories in the future. You can easily do this by scanning the donation QR code right here on the screen, or by using the donation link provided down in the description or the pinned comment. Thank you again, and I will see you in the next one.